Democracy has long been a stable political system in many countries, implemented to secure that the power lies with the people. In this film, we will talk about failing democracies and these 3 points. First, politics failing. The principles of democracy continue to be challenged. As we have previously talked about, these are variations in the level of a democracy in each country, and there exists both external and internal threats. Corruption is one, where those in power abuses this power for their own personal gain. An antidote to corruption is transparency, where the people get insight into what is going on. Another challenge is populism, which is a strategy where people in power or in the reach for power expresses distrust in the established political system or in the political elite. They do so by praising normal people and utter anti-political views and opinions. These challenges can cause democratic countries to move towards autocracy, which is a system of government by one person or a group of people with absolute power. In an autocracy, there are few limitations to power. The elected leaders can spread disinformation, deliberately spread to deceive people. This can further create mistrust or even sometimes distrust in, for example, the system or even in democracy itself. We can see a crisis of confidence growing in democracies that are faltering. This can be because of the spreading of disinformation or other causes, but an element to democracy is that the power lies with the people. The people decide what is right. What if the people decide democracy is not the way? Let us look at 2 examples. In Egypt, they tried implementing democracy in 2012 when their first democratically elected president was sworn in after throwing the previous regime the year before. A regime where one man had been in power for over 30 years. However, it is difficult to create democratic structures in a country that has no tradition for this type of government. The same can be said for Afghanistan, where the presence of Western countries in the last 20 years have tried building a democratic government. A government that soon collapsed when foreign troops left the country in 2021 and the Taliban resumed power in the country. As we can see, Western ideas of democracy might not be possible in all parts of the world, either because of old tradition of, for example, military power, or simply because the people don't want it. Another question that needs to be asked is, what if the people vote in a politician or a political party with beliefs against human rights? There are examples throughout history that shows democratic processes electing dangerous men into position of power. One example is Benito Mussolini, an Italian politician and the founder of fascism, building a dictatorship in the years after World War I. Another example is Adolf Hitler, that were elected to power in 1933. He drew inspiration from Mussolini and used democratic processes to gain power, after failing to get to power through staging a coup. It is unthinkable that something like World War II might happen again, but the possibility of electing the wrong people to power is still something that might happen. Another crisis of confidence is the contempt against politicians. Some feel like the gap between the people and the political elite continue to grow, and that those elected to represent us cannot represent us well enough. The idea is that politicians tell lies, only concerned with getting ahead, and thus creating a larger and larger gap. This contempt for politicians is something we see in all democracies in the world, even here in Norway. Public opinion matter, and if the people feel like they cannot trust the intentions of those elected, then the crisis of confidence will continue to grow. Finally, let us talk about some of the threats to democracy. We have in the later years seen old democracies with challenges like the United States and France. In the beginning of 2017, the United States fell from being a full democracy to becoming a flawed democracy, much of which had to do with the 2016 presidential election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Phrases like crazy Hillary, lying Hillary, and crooked Hillary were often heard from Donald Trump, where he tried to diminish her credibility and political position, a good example of spreading disinformation. In 2016, Trump won the presidential election over Hillary Clinton, but she won the popular vote, meaning that she received more single votes than Trump did. This can happen because of how the different states organize their elections, where most states have a winner-takes-all system. An alternative can be a system where each candidate or party wins seats based on the percentage of votes in each state, like the system we have in Norway, giving small parties a voice. 4 years later, Donald Trump lost the presidential election to Joe Biden. Before, during, and after Election Day, Donald Trump and other Republicans attempted to overturn the results, falsely alleging widespread voter fraud and trying to influence the vote counting process in swing states. These attempts to discredit the election culminated in the January 6th attack on Capitol Hill, where Trump supporters stormed the United States Capitol building, where a joint Congress convened to certify the results of the 2020 election. Although Trump did not explicitly direct people to riot against Capitol Hill, his statements suggested that they would be justified in violently attacking the Capitol and members of Congress to prevent Biden from becoming president. His refusal to accept the results of the election goes against the democratic view that the power lies with the people, and the people chose Joe Biden. In France, the Yellow Vest movement protested increased taxes, fuel prices, and living expenses, saying that President Emmanuel Macron was the president of the rich. The deteriorating economic conditions created a distrust in the political elite chosen to represent them, and the people are protesting against President Macron's socio-economic policies. There are also new democracies with challenges, like Turkey, Brazil, and Russia. In Turkey, the idea of democracy was introduced after the First World War, but it was not until after the Second World War that the country could be called a democracy. President Erdogan was democratically elected to the presidency in 2014, after criticizing his predecessor for not doing enough to prevent corruption in the building industry, which led to unsafe buildings being put up to save money. A breach of trust between the people and the president is therefore arising after the 2023 earthquake, where buildings marked safe collapsed and thousands of people were killed. In Brazil, Bolsonaro spent a lot of time following in Donald Trump's footsteps, trying to discredit the election results in the 2022 election, an election in which Bolsonaro lost to former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. This doubt in the electoral system has caused protests in Brazil, and January 8, 2023, a mob of Bolsonaro supporters attacked Brazil's federal government buildings in the capital, seeking to violently overthrow the democratically elected President Lula, a happening dangerously similar to what happened in the United States on January 6, 2021. Russia became a democracy after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. Since then, the country has tried to implement democracy and democratic processes, but are moving more towards the old ways of the Soviet Union, a system in which President Vladimir Putin was a fan of, believing that the fall of the Soviet Union was the greatest tragedy in the world. According to the Democracy Index from 2022, Brazil is considered a flawed democracy, Turkey a hybrid regime, and Russia an authoritarian regime. Even if some democracies have issues and are considered flawed democracies, is democracy still the best system of government? Can democracy survive these threats and the crisis of confidence that exists? And what is the alternative? In this film, we have talked about failing democracies by looking at these 3 points.